Back in action for the fall. Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So last week we used the story of Noah and the flood to ask an important question about the way God makes a way where we think there is no way. That important question being, can we trust this God who proposes to do this for us? Specifically, can we trust a God who allows great evil in the world? And what we found is that if the story can be trusted itself, that the sign of the rainbow is both an assurance and a challenge to that question. On the one hand, we can be assured when we see a rainbow that God is at work in our world to protect and preserve the world, not to destroy the world. God's promise was never to destroy it again. In light of our present ecological crisis and the threat of world warfare, it's kind of nice to know that, at least from the scriptural point of view, God is only ever at work to protect the world, to save the world, not to destroy. And so if there is some coming apocalypse, it will not be God. It will be our doing. And so we also can trust that our involvement in activities that protect our environment or work towards peacemaking leverage energy that's already flowing from God, that our efforts actually are made easier because that's where the Spirit is flowing as well. So that provides us some sense of assurance and perhaps hope. It also, by extension, provides us some measure of assurance for our own lives, that in our personal lives, God is only ever active to help and protect and us as well, despite our imperfections. I mean, God has chosen to work with a world that is imperfect, with people like you and I who are imperfect. And therefore, when we fall down, when we stumble, when we through our actions disappoint others or ourselves, that God is the first direction we can turn to expect help. That God is there to help us, not to harm us. God isn't sitting there up in the heavens with some kind of cosmic smite button just waiting to get at you when you disappoint yourself or others or disappoint even God. Rather, God is there to help us turn, to help us see a new vision for ourselves, for others, and to help us restore the hurt that we have caused in the world in some way. So by these two means, kind of the global perspective and the personal perspective, that rainbow offers us a sign of assurance. But it's also kind of challenging, we found last week, because God offers the love and grace to imperfect people like ourselves, but God also offers that love and grace to everybody else. Particularly everybody else who might not be so loving and gracious towards us. People who are actively harming the world as well. The rainbow reminds us that when they seek a new direction, when they turn, when they try to restore what has been done, or undo what has been done, that God is there to welcome them like the prodigal son or daughter, rather than simply treating them as the spawn of Satan. And boy, sometimes when we get hurt, don't we just want to wish they could just go away? So the rainbow challenges us about our own views of other people, specifically those who make us uncomfortable. In essence, we found that every time we see a rainbow, we are asked, in essence, will you bow before God's bow? Will you affirm God's decision that God would prefer relationship over our perfection? To work not only with people like you, but people like everybody else. That's our challenge. But the rainbow, we're going to take an actually a little different tack this morning. We asked last week, can we trust God? But there's another part to this equation besides our trust in God. That is, can God trust us? Every time God actually is involved to make a way where there is no way, it's not about me. Have you ever had this experience like where you pray and God just kind of waves a magic wand and it's done for you and like you don't have to do anything? I mean, not going to happen, not normally anyway. Normally, God works in and through us to make that way out of no way. Otherwise, we'd be robots without free will. So there's always a response. There's always those still small voices that come, those intuitions that suggest go this way, not this way. And then it's up to us to choose. Well, first of all, are we even paying attention? And second of all, if we're paying attention, we sense the direction, are we going to run the opposite direction, or are we going to follow where God calls us? So it takes a lot of trust, God's towards us, that we're actually going to make a response in order to make a way out of no way. Now, this story that we're about to hear really poses that question about trust quite centrally. It's really one of the central stories, not just of our faith, but for 3 world faiths.
Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the possessions that they had gathered, and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord and invoked the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on by stages toward the Negeb.
Oftentimes when we think about God making a way where there's no way, we're thinking about a way out of disaster. We're thinking about God saving us, saving the world, and of course that was the focus last week. But what we don't often expect is that in order for God to bless us profoundly, it also takes a lot of trust in both directions, our trust in God and God's trust in us. And through Abraham and Sarah, or Abram and Sarai as they're first known, God is going to work an amazing set of blessings, really 3 central blessings that you heard. First, they're childless and old, but yet God promises that you leave Ur and I will make you a great nation. Later, God says your descendants will be more numerous than the sands of the seas, in fact. And this nation will have its own land. It will become a truly great and well-known nation. And then, rather than just simply focusing on blessing for themselves, God says, and through this nation that will rise from you, all the families of the world shall call themselves blessed. So this set of blessings isn't just simply for themselves, it's actually for the rest of us as well. Now, last week, many of you were rather startled to find how imperfect Noah and his family were in kind of creating a way out of no way. This week, you'll find perhaps yourself equally, if not more so, surprised to find how imperfect this couple are as well, and yet God is going to trust these folks. But it actually, to kind of look ahead, we're going to find that trust is well placed. They do create a blessing, and in fact, to this day, there are 3 great world religions who look back to this couple and what they did as a source of the blessing in their own faiths. Judaism, of course, primarily will look back and say, is through Abraham and Sarah that we became a people. We were the people that were the people of the promise, the chosen people who were given this status. But also they recognized from the beginning it wasn't just for our sake alone, it was for the world. Christians would later pick up and say, yes, that's exactly right. And we were some of those who were blessed by that. Jesus was from Abraham's family line. And through Jesus, we then were able to count not just simply our ethnic kin as brothers and sisters, but spiritually, we were able to expand our family to include the Gentiles as well. People now like you and me are there because of that blessing. And also Islam counts itself blessed because of Abraham and Sarah. They're central figures in the Quran. They are the ones through whom monotheistic faith was established in this line, and also through Sarah's maidservant, Hagar. We'll get to her a little bit. They have another child, Abraham and Hagar, named Ishmael. And Ishmael is given a blessing also. And through Ishmael come then the Arab peoples, according to the Bible. Muhammad himself was an ancestor to that promise. So 3 faiths blessed through this one couple and their actions. Kind of impressive, really. But oh, how unlikely. I mean, what's God's got to do with these folks? I mean, God first calls them out of Ur. Ur was a city in Mesopotamia in modern-day Iraq. And Abraham and Sarah are well established there. We find later in other scriptures that they were wealthy. No reason at all to leave where they were. They were doing very well, other than God calling them. And God calls them to a land that is far away, a dangerous journey to get to, and that they've never been to before. And so there's the first bit of trust right there. And then they do take a step or two in that direction, but then they get to Haran, which is in modern-day Syria, not nearly all the way there, and they settle there. We find them settling there. They're kind of like Rebecca's story. Here, go do this, and they say, well, I can do this better. I'll just make it easier for myself. I'll settle here instead. So God's got to call them again. Said, remember, it's the land of Canaan I asked you to go to, not Haran. And so they're off on a journey again. Well, by the time they finally get to Cana is in the midst of a terrible famine. And they decide, well, God must not know what God's talking about. Surely God wouldn't want to have us settle here. So they keep going. They settle in Egypt instead. And there in Egypt, they're again trying to take matters into their own hands. They're really worried. In fact, Abraham's just terrified that Sarah, who is a bright young 65 years old, is too sexy for the people. That all the men are going to lust after her, and therefore they may try to kill Abraham so they could take her for a wife. So they hatch this plan. Let's just go as sister and brother. That works almost too well, because then Pharaoh actually takes an interest in Sarah and takes her into his harem. Well, now the whole promise is utterly in jeopardy, because the birth is supposed to take place through Abraham and Sarah, not Sarah and Pharaoh. So the whole thing is off until God can help once again step in. And so Pharaoh gets a series of dreams, a few calamities here and there, and he kind of realizes something's off. And anyway, long and short of the story, he realizes what's gone on. He's been deceived, and basically tells Abraham and Sarah to get out of Egypt on the first bus. So they go up towards Canaan. They settle in another place, and there again they do the same thing. Oh, let's go as brother and sister so that the men won't kill me. And once again, Sarah is now in another ruler's harem, and so the same thing has to happen. I mean, twice. You'd think that God would just kind of give up by then. But they finally make it to where they're supposed to be. And by this time, Sarah is coming on 90 years old. Now, justifiably, they're a little bit doubtful about this promise coming true. They still haven't had a child. And God says, well, keep trying. And, well, Sarah's kind of like not into it. And said, let's... How about you take my maidservant, Hagar? And let's get it done through there. And so, sure enough, he sleeps with Hagar. They have a child. Ishmael is the child, and through whom the Arab people come. But God's like, no, wait a minute. The promise was for you two, and this whole thing doesn't work unless you two have this child. At which Sarah laughs out loud when she hears this. But they do keep trying, and they do have a child, and God tells them, ironically, name this child Isaac, Yitzhak in Hebrew, which literally means he laughs, kind of allusion to Sarah laughing. Really, his name probably should have been Yotzak, which means God laughs, because God got the last laugh on that one. Although by that time, I wonder if maybe God was crying. Like, what am I going to do with these people, right? Now, by all measures, God has no reason to trust these people. And yet, God keeps trusting these people. By every measure, every time they have a chance to really make an important decision, they blow it, or nearly every time. And yet, God still finds something trustworthy that God is banking on in order to make a way where there is no way. If you want to kind of bring this home a little bit more deeply in your own life, consider your own situation where you sense those intuitions that you feel like they're coming from God, and yet they don't make logical sense, like have a kid, when you're 90 years old, but maybe something a little bit more reasonable. But those impulses that you have where you really sense, to the best of your ability, that God is calling you, what keeps you from following, and then what basis for trust might God have to keep calling you, keep sending those intuitions, those still small voices. Let's just simply take the next minute as some music plays and consider where does God find trust in you? So if God's not trusting in the perfections of Abraham and Sarah, what is God trusting that allows God to keep working with them? Well, we get a clue from actually stories that are told within two of the three great monotheistic faiths, through Judaism and Islam, both of which were asking similar questions and wrote stories outside the Bible to try to kind of read between the lines and offer ideas of what is God responding to within them. And they both came to similar conclusions. There's a great story that represents the conclusion they came to. Within Judaism, for instance, there's an ancient Mishnaic story written by a rabbi in about the 3rd century of our era who wrote this story, and it goes like this. Abraham, takes place in Ur before they left. Abraham's father was named Terah, and he was known to be a manufacturer of idols. So in the story, Terah has this store. He makes idols and he sells them. And one day he needs to go out and run an errand. So he asks Abraham to take over for him, fill in the cash register for a while. And so this man comes in, and he wants to buy an idol. And Abraham looks at him sternly and says, "How old are you?" The man says, "Well, I'm 50. I kind of perk up when I hear that because I'm 50. So he says, "You mean you're 50 years old and you want to worship an idol that was made yesterday?" The man leaves ashamed. Next, a woman comes into the store. She wants to offer a food offering for one of the idols. She sets it before him and leaves. And Abraham, the story says, takes up a stick and smashes all the idols, every single idol in his shop except the biggest one, and puts the stick in its hand. Terah comes back, sees all these idols smashed and the stick in the hand of the big one, and says, "What on earth has gone on?" Abraham says, well, all the gods got jealous when that food came in, and the big one beat up everybody else and claimed the food for himself. Terah says, that's ridiculous. These idols can't see or speak or know anything. He goes, exactly. Why are you worshiping them? See, one of the things we take for granted that the other faiths have not is that Abraham and Sarah were monotheists in a polytheistic world. They had eyes for one God and one God only, Yahweh, beside whom there was no other. And that was a challenging thing to do in their world. I would suggest it's actually just as challenging today, only we don't call these other powers that affect our lives gods anymore. We call them like our 401k, our boss, things like this, pure esteem, things like this. Those are our gods. Abraham and Sarah had eyes for only one God and one God only. It was their top priorities. Ask, what is this God's will? I would suggest reading also between the lines a bit that Abraham and Sarah were head over heels in love with this God. Head over heels. There's reasons why it's not just mere speculation. Head over heels in love with this God. So much so that essentially wherever this God calls them is where they wanted to be. They didn't actually have to be convinced to leave Ur, saying, hey, everything will be okay. You'll have just as much money, you'll earn just as much wealth, be just as successful in Canaan as you are here. They didn't have to be assured that they'd be safe even in the journey. What really motivated them to leave Ur was that that's where God was on the road already, calling to them. And they would rather be with God than be anywhere else. We get a sense for how that works with God when we look at human relationships between two people who fall in love. I'm reminded, for instance, there's this great poet of the 19th and 20th centuries, Irish poet named William Butler Yeats. Now, Yeats, when he was really young, was in his young 20s, he was invited to a party. And he goes to this party, he sees a group of his friends off the corner, and he heads straight for them because he's so excited. He's got some grand idea, and he wants to impress them all. He gets to that corner, and lo and behold, there's somebody else he's never seen before standing beside a vase of apple blossoms. Her name is Maud Gonne, and he is stunned by her beauty. Suddenly, he can't remember what the grand idea was or why he was even at the party. He only has eyes for this woman, and this woman would stay just latched onto his heart for the rest of his life. In fact, 3 times Yeats would propose to Maud Gonne. Now, she never accepted that proposal. So he was a pretty frustrated man at times. But he just could not get her out of his mind, could not let go of this just fiery love for her. For him, there was no other woman in the world besides her. And because of this yearning, this passionate yearning, some of the greatest poetry of the 19th and 20th centuries really came into being. One of them being a poem that describes this kind of passion that he had in the moment he viewed Maud Gonne for the first time. You may have heard it through somebody who picked it up and put it into song later, Judy Collins. It's the poem is called "The Wandering Angus." It goes something exactly like this. As I went out to the hazelwood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame, but something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old and wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hands and walk among long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. You ever experienced a love like this?
Because a fire was in my head, cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the ground and gone to blow the fire of flame, something rustled on the floor and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and vanished in the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hand and walk through long green dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun.
Imagine some of you know what he's talking about, had that experience of discovering someone, that when you discover them, they awaken something within. some parts of yourself that you didn't even know you had, but are very much intimately a part of you, and yet are brought out by someone outside of yourself. When Yeats experienced that, he felt called. Something called my name. Something knew me better than I knew me, which is precisely what happens when we get a sense of the Holy Spirit in our lives. God knows us better than we know ourselves. God has created us for great things. And when we get our first taste of this love that sees us for who we are and whose we are and knows us better than we know ourselves, we respond. When we get a sense that there's some conscious awareness that knows us so much that it is aware of all the bad and ugly in us, but somehow sees through that and is really staring at only the good things in us, we respond. It's hard to forget. We get a sense that the Spirit has called us to do great things, to bless us in great ways, and through our blessings, to bless the world through us. It's hard to forget. In fact, as much as we try to forget, we just can't forget. When Abraham and Sarah got a sense for that kind of love, they smashed their idols and said, "This is the only love we will follow. This is the only joy we will trace. Wherever this God is where we want to be." This God, in essence, didn't have to trust their perfections. We've seen plenty of evidence about their imperfections. No, you could say that what God trusted was their response to an experience of God's love for them, like Yeats' experience with Maud Gonne. They couldn't forget God no matter how hard they tried. And therefore, even though they would constantly turn from that sense of call, get a bit spooked at times, or try to take matters into their own hands, when they woke up to what was going on, that love was still beckoning to them. God had not given up on them, but neither had they given up on God. It gave God time to work, to try new approaches, to keep working out this blessing that seemed so impossible. Now, I have this feeling that if Abraham and Sarah were here today, and we were to ask them, what was it that brought you to take that first step out of Ur, out of that place you didn't need to move from, and God took you on this whole journey? They might say, well, you can read about it in the Bible, but you can also hear about it on your radio. They might say, take a cue from Gladys Knight and the Pips, who had something to say about this. They put it this way. I would rather live in his world, than live without him in mine. And so says the heart of every believer. I would rather live in God's world. I'd rather be where God is than be without God wherever I am. If you want God to bless you, simply allow yourself to fall in love. Fall in love with a love that is there for you already. Simply do that and trust what follows. Time and time again, you will find yourself to be an imperfect follower of that love. You will find yourself shutting off those intuitions and impulses that suggest go one way, you'll go the opposite. But if you can't forget that love, if you've got that inner sense of restlessness that is not at peace until you find yourself in God's embrace, you will keep clearing it up. You will try and try and try again until God is finally able to work that blessing. And in blessing you, God will be able to also bless the world. Amen.